Alright everybody, so this is where we are now. I made a few changes to things because I wanted to get the players working with the turn-based combat. Since we had the enemies working, I wanted to get the players as well. Um, so this is probably going to end up skipping over things by accident, so I apologize for that. But in essence, let's start with just looking at the UI menu. You'll notice our 4 players here, and then these 2 spots are for NPCs. There's a new spot in our master control under the characters for active in game. At the start of bringing up the control objects, these all start at the bottom, and if the character is active in game, they'll rise up to the top. That way, when you have an NPC hireling added on, we can bring that portrait up and have it selectable and whatnot. So we also have this new action time, and similar to the enemy's action time, in our time control there's the static var time code that basically goes up by every frame, and the action time is based on that. If the action time is less than time code, then the player can do an action, and that's what this green is here. So under our player objects, we actually have a new player action script here. Lots of the game objects are attached right there, and we do a few things. First, we awake the player panels just a tenth of a second after this is awoken. We do that just so that we make sure the game has actually populated the data first. So we delay it by just a little bit. Set the player panels. This is a function way down here that sets the color to either selected or deselected, depending on what player selected. And at the beginning of the game, we're just going to select the first player, which is player 0 right here. And then the wake player panels just toggles an animation that raises it. We can also call this later toggle player panel to false, and it'll hide it. And that way, when a hireling leaves us, we can hide the portrait in game. During the update, we do a few things. First, if we press 1 through 6 and the player is able to be selected, then we'll call this select player function. That does check, here we go, it checks 2 things. One, can we go to the menu? That's the boolean that we pass. The idea is that first it checks to make sure the action time is less than time code. If the player cannot be activated, then you can't select them if they're not ready to have actions. And if they are, and the player is already selected and we can go to menu, then it will load up the menu for the player, perhaps their inventory or stats or whatnot. If they're not already selected, then we will select him. Player selected, it will equal this new value, and we will set the player panels again. So this can go to menu is important because when the player is selected automatically through code, because perhaps in turn-based combat it's their turn to be active, we don't want them, if they were already selected on this script, to suddenly be load the stats panel up or whatnot. So next, we have nothing for if the menu's paused right now, but if it's not menu paused, then we find out if it's real-time or turn-based. We haven't done anything with the real-time yet. That'll be next, I imagine. But if it's turn-based, then we do a few things, and regardless of that, we do these 2 things. So let me talk about that first. We do the set action signals and update action panel. So the set action signals, these are this green little image right there. It's just a blank image that's either going to be green or red. And that just goes through each of the characters. I did 6, just hard code that because there's only 6. For each one, if the character length, this was a debug thing I put in there, but I'll keep it in there. If the length is greater than I, which, you know, if there's 6 characters, then it will always be greater than I, because I starts at 0. Then we find out if their action time is less than time code, then we set their color to the active signal, otherwise we set it to the inactive signal. And the second thing we do is update the action panel, which is this panel on the top right, it has the name and then the actions that they can do, which are the attack, shoot, block, and a quick cast if they have a quick cast set. So this is some extra code if you want to change the text or the specific color of the button. But currently we have no reason to make it deactive. But we will put in some logic that says, if they don't have a bow or a crossbow, then they obviously can't shoot, so we'll deactivate that button. But for now, we're just going to leave them all active. And this basically just changes the name to that character's name, and then this logic will figure out whether or not the buttons can be clicked or not. Right now, we're just going to leave them as such. So now, there's a boolean here called waiting for player, or waiting on player, and you'll see where that is in a minute. So if it's turn-based, and our time control temp update, another new variable I'll talk about in a second, is true and we're not waiting on player, then we'll action select new player. Now in our time control, we have this temp update boolean here, and it starts out as true, and it means that if it's true, then we're going to update the time during turn-based mode. If we're not in turn-based mode right here, then we're definitely going to set that to true regardless of anything else, and update time. But in turn-based mode, we only want to update the time if temp update is set to true. If it's set to false, that means we're waiting for either the player to do something or for one of the enemies to finish their actions, and we'll talk about that in a second as well. So back to the player actions. Action select new player. This function will search for a player who's ready to do an action in turn-based mode. So we're going to start with finding a new player. So our found player equals look for new action player. And that basically goes through the characters, finds out first if they're active in game. That way it ignores the hirelings if they're not active. And then if the action time is less than the time code and we haven't already found a player, then it sets the found player equals this player ID. And right now we'll leave this in here saying printed out on the console that this player is ready. So that will set to 9 if it's couldn't find a player. So if it is not 9, that means it did find a player. We're going to select that player and of course set this to false because we don't want to accidentally open up a menu. We're going to say that we're waiting on player equals true and that time control temp update equals false. Now waiting on player means that this function won't go through the next frame, which is important, and time control setting that to false is also going to keep the enemies from doing any of their actions. If we can't find a player, it's going to say waiting for player equals false and time control equals true. So that means if it gets called here, it'll just reset to null basically. And later, when an attack button is pressed, or one of the 4 buttons that's this code right here, if we're waiting on player, which of course will only be called during turn-based combat, if we're waiting on player, it's going to select a new player. And that means if it can't find a new player, it's going to allow temp update to start updating again. Otherwise, it will choose a new player. That's because when you do hit the return button to pause the game to turn-based mode, all 4 players will likely be ready to attack at the same time, and we don't want any amount of game time, the time code, to increase between their attacks. So this way, it will find the new player before it actually increases the time code. And then set recovery time is just a function that we can call that takes the action time, sets the action time rather as the current time code plus their base recovery time. It's right now just set to 1.5, no, 2 seconds. And we'll have modifications on that once we get into the logic of all the different how much recovery time each article of armor takes and so on. But for now it just adds 2 seconds. That means after they attack or do another action, they have to wait 2 seconds in the game before they can attack again. So our enemies basically in their update, there's some pausing for the enemy stuff. I think we went over that. The switching to turn-based in real time. And so if we're if we're near the player, which means we're doing actions, and the code is greater than our next action, and time control temp update is true, that means if we're waiting on a player, then this will be set to false, and the enemy won't do any actions. But if the enemy is able to do an action, and even if it's the same frame, this will set to true right now, so another enemy who can work on this exact same frame won't actually do it. They'll wait till the next frame, or the next time that the next frame where this is set to false. Then we're going to do an action, and we're going to set our recovery to the new time after our recovery. Do action, of course, we'll choose whether or not to do a range attack, melee, or set a destination move towards the player, based on that. Now, one thing that I want that is new is the set destination here. It does move the player. This happens when the enemy is too far from the player to either shoot or attack with a melee weapon. So they want to move towards the player, but only for a short while because we are in turn-based mode. So what I've got here is set destination happens if everything's if we are either in turn-based mode, basically. If we are in turn-based mode, which means key pause is not 0 or joystick pause is not 0, but we're not in menu pause, then we're going to start a coroutine that turns on navigation. We're going to start that right now, so 0.0, and then we're going to turn off navigation, setting it to false in 1 second. Let's look at that. That's right here. All it does, it waits for the time we pass in, the delay. That's that float. And then if we're setting to true, it will resume the character navigation. Otherwise, it will stop the character navigation. And let me show you what that looks like. Alright, let's see how this works in practice. So this guy is going to stop pretty far away from us. We now see that Sir Camelot is ready here. So let's go ahead and attack, and as you can see, now we can't select these anymore. His action is done. Now that we've attacked the last one, time goes on, enemy can move forward. So for 2 seconds, it moves for a short while, and then the other one back here moved. Now we're going to attack again. They're going to move closer, one, then the other. Let's see if we can find the other. Alright, so we got the one close to us, this one that's further away. So we're going to, again, attack, and now you'll notice this enemy will actually attack because he's close enough. There he goes, and the other one will move closer. And now we are able to attack. So between, basically, when the player isn't able to attack, all the enemies will do their things. Now, we're going to have a set amount of delay for each action. Obviously, if the enemy is going to move for 1 second, then we want to stop time for more than 1 second. But some of these actions, like the attack, really we might only want to stop time for maybe a 20th of a second, a 10th of a second, or 20% of a second. Because even though the attack's happening and it will hit our players, we can speed up the game just by not pausing the game for that long. So enemies can attack more in quick succession. So again, we'll do that. We'll see him move again, attack. This one will move. Then we'll do another round. Attack. Oh. Alright, I've got a bug, it looks like. For some reason, these characters are saying that they're far from the player and near the player, and they really shouldn't be saying this. This stuff is only called from the player enemy sphere, and it's on trigger enter and exit. That shouldn't be happening at all during this, so I'm not sure exactly what's going on here. Well, I'm not able to replicate it, but I've got another thing going on with the nav mesh or physics or something. Clearly they're not supposed to be just going away like that after bumping each other. So that's something I need to change. They've got motion. But these are things that we'll fix as we go along. So if I can figure out how to replicate that other bug, then I'll fix that. And this is clearly something that I need to fix pretty soon as well. But the only other thing, oh, here we go, here's the other bug. Look at that, they're saying they're far from the player and then near from the player, so it's triggering both exiting and entering at the same time. So I'm not sure exactly why that's happening. So maybe these are related bugs, I'm not sure. But I'll try to figure that out. If anyone who's following actually knows the answer, knows what's going on, please let me know. The only other thing that I changed was the movement is now the arrow keys on your keyboard. So when you're in turn-based mode, you can look left and right, or rotate left and right with the left and right arrow keys. When we're not in turn-based mode, we can move forward, backwards, left and right. So as we're moving, we can move forward and turn, or backwards and turn at the same time. We can also use Shift to... What's going on here? What's all of this? So clearly something's going on with Unity. I'll try to figure that out. That you can shift to strafe. So just go side to side if you use the left and right button while holding shift down. And you can tilt up using the two caret keys and or the comma, slash. So comma will look down or up if it's inverted. Slash will look the opposite, and the P or period button will bring it back. So you can be up here and press the period button to just bring it back. If you just hold it down, it'll snap back to 0. That way you can look around if you need to look up or down, because I assume there will be times in the games where there might be puzzles or something like that. You can also look up and down during turn-based, so we can look up and down. And apparently another thing I need to do is make sure that these, look at that, all this stuff's going on, something's going on here. The general gist of this is here. Clearly there's bugs I need to fix, but I'm not going to get to that tonight, so I want to get this video up, and the next one will have those bugs fixed. Also, these need to continue moving during turn-based, and not disappear when they're paused, so that's another thing. Okay, there you go, all these bugs.